are there in West Palm Beach. You have been following each of these different cabinet picks, and you know that there's still a couple that are left. How does Bessent fit into that overall pattern of what you've seen coming from the transition team?
Well, it's not just loyalty like we've seen with some of these picks down the stretch here, which people like Robert F. Kennedy, people like Tulsi Gabbard, people like up until yesterday, Matt Gaetz, but also Pam Bondi, who was picked last night to replace Gaetz for Attorney General. These are people who have followed Donald Trump for years, people who have been allied with him. And in terms of Gabbard and Kennedy, it's people who really joined him down the stretch, people like Marco Rubio. Although it was put to me by someone last week, it was really also about worldview and who picks and who Trump has picked. It's not just whether you stand with Donald Trump and are willing to do what he says. It's about how you see the world. And at least down the stretch here for Bessent in the last couple of months, since the beginning of the year, he's been a vocal purveyor of what Donald Trump wants to do. He's been a vocal advocate of things like tariffs and the economic policies that Trump wants to do, as he says, to kind of save America. I think you have to remember that Trump has pledged to his supporters to get the economy back on track. We've seen pledges from his cabinet to kind of do the same thing. But really, when it comes down to something like Bessent and the economy, it's a little bit more than just promises, right? You have to actually make sure that consumers and the average American family doesn't get hurt by these policies on day one.
All right, Jake Rosen, thank you. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from West Palm Beach with this breaking news. So, Ed, just off the top, this is a pick that comes from Wall Street, a billionaire. But he's not somebody who necessarily we've all seen on TV before. What is your first impression about Bessent as the selection for Treasury Secretary, and what this says to you about the Trump transition overall?
Well, this is somebody who's been in the mix even before the election as someone that could possibly emerge in one of these top economic roles, whether it was as Treasury Secretary or head of the National Economic Council, basically his national economic advisor. And so it's no surprise that Bessent ultimately was picked in the sense that he was among those being considered. What we know has been going on since the election is this sort of ongoing debate with Trump and his close associates and donors and others who are concerned about the future of the economy and the way he's going to try to shape the economy as to who exactly should be put in position. And is whoever it is someone who stands by Trump's vow to use tariffs to reset global trade, perhaps stick it to certain countries around the world who, in his view, have been imbalancing the trade relationships. And so Bessent had signaled that he's someone who's generally open to that. The other gentleman, Kevin Warsh, who was believed to be among those interviewed this week, or we know was interviewed this week, is someone who has been more skeptical of the use of tariffs, but very well may end up in one of those other roles, whether it's as head of the National Economic Council, or on the Council of Economic Advisors, or as the head of the SEC, or when Jay Powell's term expires as chairman of the Federal Reserve in 2026, perhaps Warsh, who's a former member of the board, would be installed as chairman. So he thought a little more about this one through the week, and in between some time at the golf club today and in the last few days and in conversations with various associates, determined tonight, it appears, that Bessent is going to be his pick.
And Ed, I thought Jake made a very smart point in saying that, in some of the other cabinet picks, there was a philosophical message that was being sent, but it was less practical in terms of their ability to get stuff done. When it comes to the economy, that was one of the key issues. It's what perhaps people most associate Trump with, the Trump brand with, and that it's really important that in this case, the Treasury Secretary and his economic team actually deliver good economic returns for the American people. Given that, what do you think? Do you think that some of those loyalty tests, some of the dismantling and railing against Washington was really secondary in choosing Bessent?
Not necessarily. Bessent is someone who's donated to Trump. So he's a donor, first beginning with the transition back in 2016, 2017. In fact, Bessent's someone who's worked both sides of the aisle. He was a generous contributor to Al Gore back in 2000. So this is somebody who's got relationships with members of both parties, but has become close to the president-elect in more recent years, and someone who appears, at least publicly, to embrace what it is Trump is hoping to do when it comes to economic policy. So I'm confident we'll hear from the president-elect either in some kind of a written statement or eventually in person why exactly it's Bessent versus some of these other guys. And we should also caution, none of these nominations are official yet. They're not in writing. They haven't been formally submitted to the Senate. It could always be that over the weekend he changes his mind and decides to go in another direction. And as I was hearing from a source just a few minutes ago, suggesting, how do we know it's him for tonight? Because for the last 2 weeks, he's been going back and forth with different people. It could be someone else by Monday. And that should not surprise us if that's the case. But this is somebody who has good relationships with the business community, comes out of the hedge fund world. Trump is tight with a lot of people in both of those settings. And for whatever reason, again, we haven't heard formal word from him tonight, believes that Bessent is the guy who should take the job.
I think that's a very good point, Ed, because as you are well aware, you can't actually make a nomination while you're president-elect. It's a selection and it's non-binding. Let me ask you in the final moments that we have together, who else are some of these outstanding competitors, top competitors for some of the remaining positions that are left?
Well, so we've got a handful of cabinet slots that have yet to be named. Agriculture, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the Small Business Administration. They are longtime members of the cabinet, but certainly not ever really the most important. And for a president who's been much more concerned about foreign policy and the economy, understandable perhaps that those others have slid back. So we know he was interviewing candidates for agriculture today, for labor secretary this past week, as well as those Treasury picks. And we'll see about the other ones. The goal, we've been told, is to have him name all of his cabinet picks by Thanksgiving. So that gives him a handful of days yet to come to make those final decisions before the holiday. And then again, no formal paperwork just yet, but the visits to Capitol Hill can commence. They can try to suss out who in the Senate among the 53 Republicans set to serve might have issues with one or two of these people. And who are the most vulnerable and who are the ones that are pretty much going to sail through. And they'll have plenty of time still to do that through the rest of November, December, and most of January ahead of Inauguration Day.
All right, Ed O'Keefe there for us. Thank you so much. CBS News contributor Javier David joins us now on the phone. He is also the managing editor of business and markets at Axios. So, Javier, I'm interested in the financial world's take on Scott Bessent for Treasury Secretary.
Yeah, hi, Lana, and good evening to you. So this is actually a really good pick. A lot of the names that have been floated by President Trump, Kevin Warsh, Howard Lutnick, are people that are serious economics markets folks. Basically, this is what the market wants to see, and I would be, cautious to think that when stock futures begin trading on Sunday and carrying over into Monday, it's going to be worth a few hundred points on the Dow and the S&P and all of the major indices because, at a minimum, he's not nominating Marjorie Taylor Greene to Treasury, which, given the president-elect's priority or prioritizing of loyalty, at a minimum, this is a serious candidate. He's a serious pick. And I think that investors will greet this news with at least some enthusiasm.
And we've already seen that the value of the dollar compared to other currencies has risen since President-elect Trump has won the presidency. I want to ask you a bit more about this question of tariffs on imported goods, because the promise out on the campaign trail was 20%. And as you well know, a lot of times economists will all tell you that tariffs are paid ultimately by the consumer, especially when we're talking about things that are imported from China. Those businesses are not going to take on the extra costs. All of us here in the U.S. who are paying for those goods, we're going to be taking on those extra costs. That can be good for the U.S. economy because it can be more manufacturing here in the U.S. But talk to us about what Bessent's position is on tariffs and how that might ultimately affect how the economy performs.
Right. So, look, the question of tariffs is a real one. It is a serious one, and it is one that economists are debating. You are absolutely correct in saying that companies are going to be deeply reluctant, if not, refuse altogether, absorbing the cost of taking on extra tariffs, whatever they might be. So Bessent is on record as having said that he sort of, is an advocate for Trump's policies. He likes deregulation. He likes tax cuts, as one might expect. And he's also very interested in curbing the debt burden. But he's not, I don't see anything, at least not right now, on his position on tariffs. But the fact that he's, again, a serious thinker, he's got heft in markets, you would think that, yes, on one hand, he's a loyalist, but on the other, he'd be more probably prone to tell the president, let's not do this right now, or let's not do this in an extreme way because it is inflationary. And I think that all of the serious economic thinkers know for a fact that if these tariffs are implemented, it would be inflationary. It would add to the problem, which basically helped sweep the president-elect back into office in the first place.
Javier, I'm so glad that you brought up inflation, because that has been one of those major issues that you and I have talked ad nauseum about, both on and off camera. How do you take Bessent in his ability to help fight inflation?
Well, I think it's encouraging that he is, again, on record as having said something about the debt burden. That puts upward pressure that basically that the government is spending so much money with no end in sight. The government runs, endless amounts of fiscal red ink. And they, of course, issue bonds in order to cover that spending. The fact that he is, again, on record as having said that he's interested in addressing the debt burden, that is one of the best ways that we can help contain inflation. Pushing up or lowering interest rates, helping to curb the, upward pressure that goes up on the interest rates, that helps us in terms of, consumers' credit cards, auto loans, mortgage rates. That's the single biggest way to kind of help alleviate the pressure or, sort of adjust the valve or release some of that pressure that consumers have been feeling. And that's a really important part of the equation.
Javier David, so glad to have you, especially offering that perspective on how the markets and how the rest of the economy may be affected by the president-elect's pick, Scott Bessent, as Treasury Secretary. Thanks, Javier.
Thank you.
Well, we will continue monitoring this breaking news story for you, but for now, a quick break. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows
We need to step up and help them.
and a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and